All right. Hello, welcome to another edition of It's Just Our Opinion. This is our 18th edition. Today we have Judge Roy Moore, candidate for the U.S. Senate. So sit back and enjoy, and I hope you learned something. Judge, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much.
Or I'm actually at your place
Yeah,
today.
you're right.
So you're not at my place, I'm at yours. Of all this stuff that you could be doing, why do you want to be in the Senate?
Well, I think the country needs leadership, and right now it's follow the leader up there, which is party leadership, and they don't stand for values. I think that we can make a difference by being in the Senate, as I've made a difference in the courts when I was here.
A lot of it, 2 times elected Chief Justice, Supreme Court in Alabama.
Well, interestingly enough, I was elected after being taken out by a judicial panel, and that's what the problem is in Alabama. Now, that won't be true in the Senate, but here they can take you out of your job with the Judicial Inquiry Commission, and both times I was reelected.
Oh, yeah, that's
Elected
good.
first back to Chief Justice, and then elected as Republican nominee in the Senate.
Yeah. Well, tell me this, you have a history of probably being one of the most conservative candidates, politicians, whatever you want to call it, in Alabama. Why do you think it is that the national Republicans don't support you?
Well, I can only take what Mitch McConnell said to CNN before the last election. He said, we don't need another conservative rebel in the Senate, hard to manage. Well, maybe I am hard to manage, but I stand for the values the people of Alabama stand for. I stand for the values that I was raised for and to understand. Raised in the country in a simple life, poor income, and, I just believe that Alabama values are not what they have in Washington right now.
Well, let's talk about Alabama values. Do you think Alabama values are different than the values of other parts of the country?
Well, I think across the country, 90-something% of the people believe there's a God, believe in the Judeo-Christian God. But, in other parts of the country, they're not as conservative as we are here in Alabama. And I think we are more of a fighter here in Alabama. We dare defend our rights is our motto. And we do stand up for rights, and that's true throughout our history.
You think that's probably goes back to the other question, why the national Republicans don't come in. You have a history of not backing down when something's right. You stand for it.
I think you got to understand. I think politicians today, too many of them say one thing, and they get in office, they do something else. Basically, when you get to the Congress or the Senate, it's a high position. There's good retirement. That's not what I'm going for. I said I was in one term. But they want to stay there, and they do anything to stay there. And they don't vote the way the people of Alabama would want them to vote. So often they're ruled by lobbyists. I mean, people in Alabama, for example, say we ought to have term limits. Well, you're not going to get term limits passed by the Congress. They're not going to do it. They say we are interested in the national indebtedness. That's going up to over $23 trillion now. That's in spending. But they don't do anything about it because they're elected to spend money. And they don't conserve money. They don't regard the things about God, about morality, which is one of the biggest things we're lacking in this country. People today don't understand where morality comes from, and our forefathers did.
Speaking of term limits, I think the Senator Ted Cruz, I believe, actually introduced a bill for term limits. What's the chances do you think that's passing?
Up there, zero.
Zero.
I mean, they'll say one thing on the trail when they're campaigning, but when they get up there, they don't want to limit their terms.
No.
And if they did, they would be very unpopular. Well, I think we should have term limits. I think our forefathers didn't have term limits because they weren't enticed by the money and the power and the things that run the Congress today. And I think we do need term limits. And I'd like to see a constitutional amendment to that effect. And there are 2 ways to pass a constitutional amendment. And you have to know the Constitution, Article 5, to understand it.
It's interesting because here in Alabama, we actually do have a sort of term limits. Constitutional officers serve 2 terms and they have to sit out.
Yeah.
How many senators you think could go back if they could serve 2 terms and had to sit out 1?
Well, I don't think they would.
They wouldn't go back, they wouldn't get reelected, would it? That special interest would find somebody else. And so-
Well, special interest is what's running the country. And people, if you look at the top 4 candidates, top 3 besides me, they're all driven by special interest out of Washington. Every one of them are funded by the Chamber of Commerce, by Club for Growth, by the Senate Leadership Fund, different ways, but they're funded. They get their money, they have their money before they even start running.
Money's not Alabama money then.
No, no.
Well, what about, just change subject just a little bit, you're an attorney and a judge. What do you think about President Trump? Do you think he should be removed? Do you think they have a real case?
I don't think they have a case at all. You can only be removed, as a president by, for treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. And I think that's very clear that they don't have treason, bribery, or high crimes and misdemeanors. But interestingly enough, in 1858, Johnson was, impeached by radical Republican Congress. And at that time, he vetoed many bills like the districting of the South and ruled by military generals, the redistricting of the South. And he vetoed that, and he also vetoed the tenure bill. And for that, Congress was upset with him. And they impeached him, and then he went to the Senate for removal. And he was saved, interestingly enough, by one Republican, Edmund Ross out of Kansas. And he said then that a president shouldn't be impeached just because you don't like his policies, just because out of partisan considerations. I think that's what's driving the impeachment today.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned, there was no crime that the House found. They just felt like they didn't like him, basically what it sounds like.
Well, interestingly enough, and then they turn around and they say they don't want to subpoena Hunter Biden. Well, it was all about Hunter Biden. It was all about him having a job on a gas board over in the Ukraine and making a lot of money. And, we should be interested in our foreign relations when Hunter Biden is the vice president's son, was over there on the gas board. So they don't want to get down to the facts, they just want to get to the president. And it's interesting, under the Constitution, the president has a lot of responsibilities for foreign affairs. He appoints ambassadors, he makes treaties, and certainly that's his responsibility. And I think President Trump was doing his job by looking into this, because you can't have, administration family on gas boards when you're ruling,
Kind of looks like there'd be a conflict
Yeah,
somewhere.
should be, yeah.
Reckon why the Democratic House couldn't see that?
Well, I think the Democratic House does see it. I think they just want to find something against Trump. They've been on him since he was elected, with the Russian tactics that he supposedly used. They've never found any Russian tactics. But what's interesting about that is they admitted, the Democrats have admitted, using those tactics in Alabama in the last race for the United States Senate. It's called Project Birmingham, and it arose out of staffers from, interestingly enough, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that started disinformation, and that's where all false allegations came from. And that was the source of it, was to interfere with an election. Everybody's known it. Even Reid Hoffman, the Microsoft billionaire who funded it, admitted it and apologized. Nobody's done anything about it. They're not interested in seeing fair elections.
The time for fair elections is probably, as we know it from 30, 40 years ago, it's probably over, don't you think?
Well, there's a
Unless
lot of
there's some
corruption in
changes.
elections. After the election 2017, the Secretary of State of Alabama supposedly had removed 650,000 deceased voters, improper voting. That's unbelievable. And we had in the last election people to get on camera and say they came from out of state to vote in this election. And then we had machine problems. There was a lot of corruption in the election, yes.
Just coincidence, it was a low turnout too, of course,
Yeah.
and, which makes it easier. If
Well,
you're going to
yeah.
sabotage an election, it's easier with a low turnout than,
Well, and you mentioned the Republicans in Washington, the establishment didn't want me. And that was very clear in the last election. I think the voters of Alabama saw it when Richard Shelby, who is a Republican, came out and urged people not to vote for me, to write in votes. And over 22,000 votes were written in, and I lost by less than 21,000. So it's opposition from Washington against me because of what I've stood for, because of my acknowledgement of God and other things which are completely legal.
back to the impeachment. We Senator Jones, Doug Jones, that actually beat you in the special election, is, of course, run again. He said the other day after the lawyers got through, President Trump's lawyers, that they might have had some good points. Do you think he's really talking to win, trying to win again, or do you think he really believes that?
I think he is trying to win, but I don't think the people of Alabama, they've seen his agenda, they've seen how he opposed the good nominees that were appointed to the Supreme Court, how he's talked down everything about abortion. I think they see what he stands for. He's not what the Alabama people stand for. And any Republican that goes to that's elected is going to beat.
Yep. It's always interesting to see that right before an election, that no matter whether you're Democrat or Republican, a lot of times they'll start seeing what people wanna hear. And
Well, that's
kind of, sometimes you have
that's
to
what I
look at
said.
that, and
That's what politicians do. They say one thing, they do another, they get there and they hide behind voting, the way they vote, they watch that, if it counters the people. One big thing that you don't see any of these candidates speaking about, because either they don't understand it or they intentionally don't want to address it, is the 60-vote rule in the Senate.
Yeah.
That's unconstitutional. It's a Senate rule. A Senate rule can't contradict the Constitution. But they hide behind that voting thing. When they don't want to vote for things, they say, well, we can't get up enough votes to get it to the floor. You pass legislation under the Constitution by majority vote, both the House and the Senate. And they simply made a rule, they call it the filibuster rule. It's not to prevent filibuster at all, it's to prevent having to address legislation they don't want to address, which the people are interested in.
Oh, yeah.
And they find it very easy to do it that way.
And I believe that was actually an issue, that come up several times
It did.
during the special election in 17, Nobody that's there wanted to change it.
They don't want to change it, and I would change it. And you
Yeah.
say, well, how would you change it? Well, they know it's unconstitutional, and if it's unconstitutional, there's a mandate to change it. It's just nobody speaks out about it. Nobody talks about it. Nobody does anything to stop it.
I was talking a while ago, it's kind of interesting, how people will change their views sometimes right before the election, but we see politicians all over the state too, that right before this qualifying time, they'll start going back to church, so they can put what church they're a member of, and, that's kind of interesting too, but it's
Well-
kind of sad that we have people that actually don't really go to church and believe in church, except during elections, but we
Well,
see it all over.
They get out and they say they want to put prayer back in school. I want prayer back in school. Prayer should never been taken out of school. Neither should we be forced to accept the LGBT agenda and take on transgender, people in our employment if we don't believe in that, or, same-sex marriage. You have to understand, those issues politicians avoid.
Oh, yeah.
And they don't, but they're very important. We've got an Equality Act up there before Congress, and it's been voted down, I hope, now. But it'll come back. And we've got Republicans up there that are for Equality Act. And if you know what that means that these people that believe in transgenderism get special rights. And if you don't accept those rights, then you could lose your business. For example, we have a case, the Foundation for Moral Law, which my wife runs, that I started, stands up for religious liberty. And they don't want to just do their thing, they want you to accept that. And if you do accept it, it goes against your faith, but that's called the loss of religious liberty. And we've got a case in the Supreme Court right now where a funeral director hired a person who was transgender and came in and he said, I can't have this, people don't wanna come and bury their loved ones, you know, that didn't believe in this. And so, he lost his job and he had to go to the Supreme Court and it's still up there.
Yeah, it's sad, like I say, it goes back to this Alabama values that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Alabama values are just, it's hard to find. I mean, you just don't find them in Washington and pretty much anywhere else in the country. We just good,
Well, I
good
think
solid.
Alabamians are special. They not only believe in conservative values, they've stood for conservative values, whether it's equality, between races, or whether it's, states' rights, which is written in the 10th Amendment. We believe in standing up for our rights, and they did that very well when the Ten Commandments monument was at the Supreme Court. There was nothing to prevent a monument acknowledging God's law. I saw just not too long ago in Federalist Papers, Federalist 43, James Madison answered that and said we could have a constitution because of the laws of nature and nature's God, which was written in the first sentence of the Declaration. So, you know, without the acknowledgement of God, we lose our morality, and they knew that.
Yeah.
And I think all across Alabama, all across America, we see crime growing, people getting kidnapped. It's
sad. Let me ask you about something else. This is, consistently in the election that you're in, the poll numbers.
Yeah.
You never run good in the polls, but you always seem to pull it out at the end. How do you do it?
Well, because polls, there's a certain way they use polls to push their candidate, and that's being done big time in this election. They push the candidate so that people say, well, I don't wanna vote for somebody that's gonna lose, so I'll vote for this person, and that's called a push poll. And they do it within themselves to put them up. But I've always, been low in the polls, every time I've run, and then I've run 2 elections, for Chief Justice where I won without a runoff. And when I ran for the Senate, I nearly won without a runoff, and then that's caused the runoff between Strange and I, and that caused a lot of friction up in Washington. They wanted Strange there. Strange was historically a lobbyist, that's where he came from. And that's what runs Washington DC, and we've got to stop that. When I went up there, after I had won, you know, the first thing they did, they sat me down in front of a big table with a lot of people out there, and around the table, they started asking me about what I feel about this job, this industry, that industry, and I answered as best I could. But what they want to do is realize that if you represent them, you're gonna have to do what they want, because they're the ones that contribute to your campaign. Well, I don't take special interest money, and that's why I always down in polls, or down, not polls, but down in financing, and it's true in this election.
But you've proved through the election, you don't have to have a lot of money to win. Now, a lot of these candidates, they have to, but you've proven over and over, you don't have to have, the $20 million and stuff.
Well, this one, they spent $50 million in the last election against me. The Republicans spent 30, and when I beat the Republican establishment candidate, the Democrats spent 20 million more, and they were backed by some of the Republicans, as I said about Richard Shelby. So they always put a lot of money against me, and I never have a lot of money. So, you know, I just depend on the people of Alabama. That's where I came from. That's what I'm gonna stand by.
One last question before we go. Time's about out, but if you win the nomination, and then of course go on and beat Doug Jones, what's the first bill that you think you'll introduce? I know you've got a
Well,
list.
that's kind of an easy question, because actually in 1997 and 1998, I was recognized by the Congress, by both houses, by standing up for religious liberty. And in 2005 and 2004, we introduced the Constitutional Restoration Act, which basically said judges cannot exclude the acknowledgement of God under the First Amendment, and that's altogether right. It would restore the basis of the Constitution. It was called the Constitutional Restoration Act. And it took the jurisdiction away from courts with regard to the acknowledgement of God and God's law. And that is true historically because it conforms to the organic law of our country, the Declaration of Independence, as written and recognized in the United States Code. So I think that if we're going to be a good nation, if we're going to be great, as they want to say, if we're going to be a great, we've got to allow the acknowledgement of God and our faith upon which this nation was founded. And if we don't, we will lose that morality, which is, according to Washington, the basis of government. It is virtue of morality, which is the necessary spring of popular government, he said. And he went on to say, who that is a sincere friend to it can look with indifference on attempts to shake the foundation of the fabric. And certainly our foundation is being shaken by crime and drugs and a socialism movement right now, which threatens to destroy everything we stand for.
Well, I said that was the last. I gotta hit you with this last one before we go.
Okay.
President Trump, does he survive in the Senate and win re-election?
Oh, he's gonna survive in the Senate. The Senate, they know already that they can't go and remove a president when he's been impeached without a proper basis under the Constitution. They know that. All this is show, whether it's by the Democrats or the Republicans defending it, it's show. They should have dismissed it right off because there is no constitutional basis. And everyone recognizes this. Alan Dershowitz is known to be very liberal. He's a constitutional scholar. He's very liberal. He voted for Obama. He voted for Hillary Clinton. And even he says there's no constitutional basis for this. And if, the scholars recognize there's no constitutional basis for this impeachment, and it should have been dismissed. But they're dragging it out, but they will not remove the president, and I believe he will get reelected because the Democratic Party has moved so far to the left.
And still moving.
And still moving to the left, yes.
It's interesting, their leading candidate,
Oh.
Bernie Sanders, don't even claim to be a Democrat in the Senate. He's an independent, but he's running for their nomination. Judge, thank you very much for being here on this. Folks, I hope you've enjoyed this. Like I say, we don't endorse any candidates on the show. We want to have all of them here. Judge Moore, known him for years, proud to have you here.
Thank you.
But we said a lot of stuff today, but remember, everything we say is just our opinion.